Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump doubling down on acquiring Greenland. That's as Vice President J.D. Vance pays a visit to the Arctic island. What they say about threats facing the strategic location and its impact on American security. Iris Tao at the White House. The Trump administration today asked the Supreme Court to allow them to continue deporting Venezuelan illegal immigrants under the Alien Enemies Act. Arlene Richards has the latest in the legal battle. A new government report finds that tens of thousands of underage immigrants have been lost during the last administration. Arian Pazdar has the details of the findings. A powerful earthquake hit Southeast Asia. At least 140 people are dead and over 700 injured in Burma, also known as Myanmar. In Thailand, a skyscraper under construction collapsed. Israeli forces launch an airstrike on the Lebanese capital of Beirut, and Israel's defense minister warns the Lebanese government to enforce the ceasefire or Israel will. Jason Perry reports.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The U.S. can't do without Greenland. That's what President Trump says as Vice President J.D. Vance warns about Chinese threats as he visits the Arctic island. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can't.
The Trump administration now sounding very serious about the U.S. annexing Greenland. President Trump on Friday warns that China and Russia are expanding their influence in the Arctic, including by sending more ships to that region. Trump says the U.S. needs Greenland to ensure international security.
If you look at Greenland right now, if you look at the waterways, you have Chinese and Russian ships all over the place.
And Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory that belongs to Denmark, is in a strategic location between North America, Europe, and Russia. President Trump's reiteration of his desire to get it comes as Vice President J.D. Vance is visiting a U.S. military base in the Arctic island. The vice president issues a strong message to the Danish government, saying it failed to invest enough to protect Greenland from Chinese and Russian threats.
As China and Russia have taken greater and greater interest in Greenland, in this base, in the activities of the brave Americans right here, we know that too often our allies in Europe have not kept pace. They haven't kept pace with military spending, and Denmark has not kept pace in devoting the resources necessary.
Vance further warns that China has been placing economic pressure on Greenland and increasing military trainings around it.
We can't just bury our head in the sand or in Greenland, bury our head in the snow and pretend that the Chinese are not interested in this very large landmass. We know that they are.
Meanwhile, Greenland's new prime minister says the U.S. visit signaled a lack of respect and calls for unity in the face of what he calls pressure from the outside. Greenland lawmakers also formed a new government right before Vance's visit to band together to resist U.S. pressure. The vice president, though, says the U.S. respects Greenland, but also is the one who can protect it.
Because we're the only nation on earth that will respect their sovereignty and respect their security, because their security is very much our security, as these brave Americans show.
The vice president also thanked U.S. service members who are serving in that remote military base, saying they're doing a tough duty in a harsh place to keep Americans safe. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court for permission to continue deporting Venezuelan illegal immigrants believed to be members of terrorist gang Tren de Aragua. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more on this.
In a 40-page emergency filing Friday, the Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to set aside two lower court rulings. The rulings are temporarily blocking the president from deporting illegal Venezuelan immigrants under the wartime law. Meanwhile, the district court judge extended the block on Friday until April 12th. Trump wrote a proclamation invoking the law, saying the immigrants are members of terrorist gang Tren de Aragua and calling it an invading force. More than 200 suspected members have already been deported to an El Salvador prison under a negotiated agreement between the two countries. Alternatively, they're asking the highest court to pause the blocking orders until the court can conduct a complete review. The request comes after a D.C. District Court judge and a majority appeals court panel ordered the president to stop using the 18th century law to deport individuals. The courts say some of them may not be members of the gang. They've decided that each individual should be granted a hearing to determine their membership. The Justice Department argued in court papers that federal courts shouldn't interfere with sensitive diplomatic negotiations. It also claimed that the immigrants should make their case in a federal court in Texas where they are being detained. It's unclear whether or not the Supreme Court will review the case. And in other legal cases filed on Friday, big law firms Jenner and Block and Wilmer Hale separately filed lawsuits. They're challenging executive orders seeking to shut them out of government business and strip key lawyers of their security clearances. Both firms argue that the president's executive orders are an unprecedented attack on the legal profession. They say his effort is in retaliation for their work for past clients he doesn't like and for past causes he disagrees with. If carried out, they say the orders would devastate their practices. These lawsuits follow a case filed by Perkins Coie, who Trump also sought to remove security clearances. A district court judge blocked the order, saying it was likely unconstitutional. Other law firms named in executive orders have chosen to work with the administration. The Paul Weiss firm agreed to commit $40 million worth of pro bono work to causes supported by the Trump administration. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
More illegal immigrants deported from the U.S. land back in Venezuela today. Meanwhile, a new government report finds that ICE lost track of over 30,000 underage immigrants during the Biden administration. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar is in Latin America with the immigration update.
This morning, a Venezuelan state airline brought almost 200 illegal immigrants deported from the U.S. back to South America. It's the second group to land in Venezuela. On Thursday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio criticized the Venezuelan official for the way he welcomes back convicted criminals.
This guy lands. This guy's a guy that attacked a police officer in New York City and laughed about it in court with a smirk on his face. When he gets off the plane in Venezuela, he's welcomed by this character named Diosdado Cabello. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. Yes. And he welcomes in hugging the guy. So does anybody have any doubt that these people are pushing these people into the United States to destabilize us in the region?
On Friday morning, Cabello, who's the Interior Minister of Venezuela, responded to Rubio's comments about him.
They get upset because we receive Venezuelans lovingly.
Cabello also says the U.S. should have taken the individual to court in the U.S. However, the person in question was taken to court, convicted, and then deported. And El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, says that President Trump will be hosting him at the White House next month. Illegal immigration could be a major topic during the meeting. Now, this comes as a new report finds that tens of thousands of underage immigrants have been lost during the last administration. This report was published by the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security. The report describes underage illegal immigrants as unaccompanied alien children, or UACs. According to the Inspector General, between 2019 and 2023, ICE transferred more than 448,000 UACs. More than 31,000 of the children's release addresses were blank, undeliverable, or missing apartment numbers. ICE also was not always aware of the location for UACs who fled HHS custody. Underage immigrants who can't be accounted for have long been associated with possibly being victims of human smuggling, sex trafficking, and more. And in other immigration-related news, Secretary Rubio says the Trump administration has already revoked the visas of 300 students, some of whom participated in pro-Palestine activities. The latest case made headlines on Thursday after a Turkish student was detained by masked officials from the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. On Friday, a spokesperson for the State Department was asked whether the student was detained solely because she criticized Israel.
The DHS, which manages this framework, clearly felt that she had committed crimes that required her detention.
She added that she can't give any details because the case is currently playing out in the courts. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Turning now to Southeast Asia, a deadly earthquake rocked Burma, also known as Myanmar. More than 150 people are dead and over 700 injured. It also brought down a skyscraper under construction in neighboring Bangkok, Thailand.
Myanmar declared a state of emergency in some parts. Several people were killed when a mosque partially collapsed, and local media said others died as a hotel caved in. In Thailand, officials said one of at least a few people were killed under the rubble of the partially built skyscraper. They added that dozens of workers were rescued from the building's remains, but many are reportedly still trapped. Bangkok city authorities declared the capital a disaster-stricken area, saying they needed to assess and monitor damaged areas. Here, hundreds rushed out of buildings onto the streets in panic, and during the tremors, water spilled over the side of a tall hotel building. One Thai office worker saw his building start to sway side to side.
At first, I didn't realise it was an earthquake, but then I saw the table shaking, and the chair and computer started swaying too. I only knew for sure when I heard the noise of the cracking walls and cracking glass. Part of the ceiling even collapsed. That's when I had to run out.
The United States Geological Survey said the quake was of 7.7 magnitude and at a depth of 6.2 miles. It was followed by a powerful aftershock. The epicenter was just over 10 miles from Myanmar's second city of Mandalay, which has a population of about 1.5 million. The country's army-run TV showed collapsed buildings and debris strewn across the city's streets. Myanmar's fire department said it had started a search to check for casualties and damage, but had no further information.
Terrorists in Lebanon reportedly fired projectiles towards Israel today, and in response, Israel launched airstrikes on targets in Lebanon, including in the country's capital of Beirut. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Israel reported on Friday that it intercepted a projectile that was fired from Lebanon, while another one landed in Lebanese territory. Afterward, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement saying, quote, "We will not allow firing at our communities, not even a trickle." Israel responded by launching airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. Israel also reported striking a target in the Lebanese capital of Beirut. Israel said the site they hit was used to store drones for Hezbollah, and that Israel gave warnings to civilians before the strike, which apparently caused traffic jams in southern Beirut as residents tried to evacuate the area. One man was even seen evacuating on foot between the cars. Emergency crews and members of the Lebanese military responded to the scene of the Israeli airstrike. A business owner in the area who had what appears to be a picture of the late Hezbollah leader hung on the wall behind him reacted to the strike.
I have been in the area for 22 years, and I know this building. But they want to scare us. They want to intimidate us, but they won't succeed.
Meanwhile, another resident said she was terrified by the strike.
We ask nothing from the Lebanese state except for security and safety. We only want security for our children and a compensation.
Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, also had a word for the Lebanese government while referencing Galilee in northern Israel.
For any attempt to harm the Galilee settlements, the roofs of the houses in the Dahiyeh district of Beirut will tremble. I am sending a clear message from here to the Lebanese government. If you do not enforce the ceasefire agreement, we will enforce it.
However, Lebanon's president said that Israel's strikes in Lebanon were unjustified, but he added this.
More importantly, what is happening increases our determination and commitment to build our country and army and extend our control over all of our lands to protect Lebanon and all its people.
He also said the Lebanese army was investigating to find out who fired the rockets and that they will not allow anyone to use Lebanon as a launching pad. This comes as the United States announced sanctions on a Hezbollah-linked finance network in Lebanon. The U.S. also announced up to a $10 million reward for information leading to the disruption of the Hezbollah financial network. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, the Secretary of Defense says the U.S. is resolved to work with allies and rebuild its military in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China's aggression. And a petition from Shenyang Performing Arts garners over 1,500 signatures. It calls on the American government to protect its citizens and companies from the Chinese Communist Party's malign foreign influence campaigns. NTD's Fiona D speaks with a member of Shenyang after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says that the U.S. and the Philippines must stand shoulder to shoulder to ensure stability in the South China Sea. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more on Hegseth's visit to the Philippines.
We are resolved at this time, at this moment, to work with our partners to reestablish the warrior ethos, to rebuild our military and reestablish deterrence, and come alongside our allies and partners, first and foremost, in this region.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth met with Philippine President Marcos during his trip to Asia. Afterwards, Hegseth held a joint press conference with the Philippine Secretary of National Defense.
We are facing a common threat, which now is the overreach of the Communist Party of China.
Hegseth said that the U.S. is committed to working with allies and ramping up its deterrence of China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific region.
It reflects the strength, as I said, of our ironclad alliance, particularly in the face of Communist China's aggression. We will achieve peace through strength. We do not seek war. We seek peace, but those who long for peace must prepare for war, and we stand united shoulder to shoulder.
China claims ownership of roughly 90% of the South China Sea. An international tribunal ruled China's claims to be invalid. However, China rejects the ruling and continues to actively defy it. The Philippines was the first stop on Hegseth's trip to Asia on Friday, followed by Japan. The U.S. and the Philippines made a mutual defense treaty in 1951 to defend each other if either one gets attacked. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Classical Chinese dance company Shenyun Performing Arts has been the target of a transnational repression campaign by the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. This includes bomb threats and death threats, inaccurate hit pieces, including multiple from the New York Times, misleading social media posts, and even physical violence. The company has now released the results of a petition that has garnered over 1,500 signatures, calling on the American government to take action against the Chinese regime's infringements on international human rights and for American media to conduct transparent and accurate reporting. Earlier today, NTD's Fiona G talked with Lishai Lemish, a master of ceremonies with Shenyun Performing Arts. Here's the interview.
Before we get into the details here of this petition, to our viewers out there who might not be familiar with Shenyun, tell us a little bit more about this company. I mean, where do you perform? How many shows do you put on every year? What can audiences expect out of a performance?
Sure. So I'm pretty sure everybody's seen our billboards. They're all over the place on the highways and our posters and our TV and YouTube ads. Shenyun is the world's premier classical Chinese dance and music company. The company's mission is to revive 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. We do this through beautiful dance, through music, costumes, animated backdrops, a live orchestra. The main art form is classical Chinese dance, which is extremely expressive and athletic. We have MCs like myself who just come on and introduce the next piece, give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with the history and the culture. We have stories from ancient legends, from literature, ethnic and folk traditions, and even things pieces about what's happening in China today. We have singers. So it's a beautiful and moving experience, about 2 hours long, many vignettes, each about 5 minutes long, through 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. We have 8 companies that tour around the world at the same time right now. We do about 700 to 800 shows every year all over the world, 5 continents. And we're at Lincoln Center. That's where we had our press conference the other day. I'm currently in Boston with another group just outside of Boston and Worcester. And that's what we do. We've been doing this for 18 years.
All right, so let's get into the specifics of this petition. I'll get into the numbers in just a minute. But first, this specific sentence in the petition, it says, quote, "We are horrified to see the gross distortions and false narratives about our work, our faith, and our way of life echoing through mainstream media." I mean, tell us more about this. What type of allegations, and what are the artists themselves saying about this?
Right. So alongside the beauty and the artistry of the performance, one of the things that we've been facing all along has been attempts to sabotage the company and its mission of reviving Chinese culture by no one other than the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing. And this has taken many forms, and there's a lot of examples. I have a website that I maintain with over 149 at this moment cases in 40 different countries of attempts to sabotage, everything from diplomatic pressure to tire slashing, website hacking, death threats. But what we've seen over the last year is an unprecedented escalation of this into America, primarily through lawfare, frivolous lawsuits trying to take down the company, attacking our headquarters. We've seen this through media attacks, and we've seen this through bomb threats. The media attacks in particular, we first learned about not when they appeared in the media, but from leaked documents from inside China about a year and a half ago, saying that this is what they were going to do. And we had multiple documents coming out saying that they have this plan to try to sow discord in the United States between Shenyun, which is a New York-based company with many American citizens. It's in many ways a symbol of American freedom and American entrepreneurship and grit and determination and first-generation immigrants being extremely successful. Shenyun is the fastest-growing performing arts company in American history. And to try to pit Shenyun against the American government and the American people, primarily through investigations, through lawfare, and through weaponizing social media. And they named specific social media influencers they were going to support. And their ultimate goal was to try to get this into mainstream media. And that's what you mentioned earlier, with now 10 articles in the New York Times that are really hit pieces attacking Shenyun. And what's interesting in these articles, they're based on the claims of a few former performers. And just a handful of performers really are the ones that are featured. And so our performers and former performers and parents of performers, including students who are performing with Shenyun as part of their practicum with Feitian College, 1,557 of them signed this petition, and I did myself as well, saying we are horrified by the inaccuracy of the depiction of Shenyun. This does not represent us. It does not represent our experience in the company. It does not represent what our sons and daughters have experienced. And it is unfair, and we're calling upon the American government to investigate who's behind this, who's behind the transnational repression, and for the media to report accurately and fairly about who we are. Listen, Shenyun Performing Arts is a world-class performing arts company. Our dancers are the best in the world at what they do. They work very hard. There's no doubt about that. They're very dedicated to their craft, and it's elite. It's like athletics in professional sports. People work hard. People sometimes get injured, but when they get injured, they have medical care about it. This is what we do, and our side of the story has not been told in the media, at least in these articles that we've seen. And so that's what this petition is about.
And just then on the screen there, we actually saw some footage of some slashed tires on your tour buses, I believe. Tell us more about, because sometimes, as I understand it, it's going from just threats to actually physical actions. Tell us more about those tires.
Yes. So actually at the press conference we had at Lincoln Center a couple of days ago on opening night, one of the mothers of the performer said she considered this to be attempted murder, because what we discovered was during a pre-trip inspection of a bus, a cut, as you saw in the picture there, that's like a crescent shape, and it was very, very deep. And so the bus was brought to the garage, and the mechanic there said that this cut is extremely interesting because it was deliberately done in such a way that it would be very deep, but it would not deflate the tire right away, but rather would force the tire to explode at high speeds on the highway. With 35 people aboard, with many other cars around, it was done on the front tire of the bus. This was discovered once in Canada. I then later discovered one myself on a truck in Little Rock, Arkansas. And this is here again in Costa Mesa, California. There's multiple incidents with the same exact cut trying to cause damage to lives and property. And this goes beyond just pranks and smearing. This is actually an attempt on people's lives.
And on that note of that press conference, I was there as well 2 days ago. Something that Falun Dafa Info Center Executive Director Levi Browdy said really stood out to me. And it was that essentially this is just the beginning, right? If the CCP succeeds in a repression campaign against Shenyun, which is, as you say, an American company, it won't just stop there. What's at stake here, Li Shai?
Right. So there's a lot of attention to this right now in the current administration, even going back a couple of administrations, about this transnational repression and how it's affecting American society. And you have everything from the CCP-maintained police stations and fox hunts and to their attempts to influence social media. We saw this with Hollywood, with censorship. We saw this with the NBA, with really trying to control the narrative about what Americans can say and think about China, but even more broadly about our own society and our own freedoms. And so Shenyun is an American company, and the CCP is coming after us here in America and around the world. And we, I think, see this, I personally do, as a proof of concept attempt. They're trying to, all these different tactics and maneuvers, for anything from social media manipulation to diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, and even trying to get non-Chinese YouTubers to pay them to smear Shenyun, commentators online and tweaking reviews and algorithms and all these different things that they're doing. Of course, spies, there have been spies that have been caught. And so if they can take down, in their mind, if they can take down Shenyun or at least cause a significant damage, they could go after any individual in American society, any politician, any organization, any faith-based group, any entertainment industry entity, anybody that they want, they could go after. And this is very, very dangerous, of course, for American freedoms to have an adversary like the CCP be able to manipulate American society, manipulate our own public opinion.
Right, especially when a cornerstone of America's democracy and foundation is freedom of speech and religion. So Li Shai, on this petition as well, there's another line that says Shenyun is a significant U.S. soft power asset. How so?
Yeah. Well, Shenyun shows what China was like before the CCP came to power in the middle of the last century. By doing so, it allows the world to see what China really was like, not under this dictatorship. And it allows the Chinese people to reconnect with their own heritage. The vast majority of our performers are ethnic Chinese, and we have some of the world's best choreographers, composers, classical Chinese dancers, and we're bringing back the ancient legends and traditions and values, the ideas of courage and integrity and loyalty. And it's only in the United States you can have something like this. Shenyun cannot perform in China. It cannot be based in China. There are a lot of talented people in China for sure, but they don't have the freedom to do what Shenyun is able to do here. And so that's really a symbol of what America has to offer to the world, the alternative to the CCP in China, of an actually free China that has the ability to do these kinds of things. That's a very important message for a world that wants peace and freedom and open communication across cultures and nations. And Shenyun provides all of that. And we're very fortunate to have this opportunity. And I think this is a critical moment in our battle for this freedom. And we don't take it for granted. And we hope that we can get more support from the American government, American media, and American public to protect these freedoms for Shenyun's sake, for the Chinese people's sake, and for America.
So you say the Chinese Communist Party is feeling threatened?
They're absolutely threatened. They're afraid of people seeing what China would be like without them. They're afraid of these ancient legends and values like courage and integrity and compassion and faith, which are so antithetical to the Chinese Communist Party's doctrine. And they're afraid of how Shenyun, as part of the performance, we show what's happening in China today. We show the tyranny and we show the courage of the resistance to it. And they're afraid of all of this being discovered on stages like Lincoln Center and Kennedy Center in front of VIPs in America and around the world from every walk of life. They're terrified, and that's why they've always tried to stop Shenyun. They see it as an existential threat. I think they recognize the power of this performance, the power of traditional culture from China being rediscovered, and they're very afraid. That's exactly why Shenyun needs to get support from all walks of life in the United States and around the world, because it's so powerful and because it has such a positive and bright message that is so inclusive and so conducive to bringing out really the best of everybody.
Li Shai, I have a list here of just some of the threats that Shenyun has faced just during this past year. We have most notably, of course, on February 20th, a bomb threat at the Kennedy Center, which I understand you were there for that. Same day in France, another threat. In Amsterdam in the Netherlands on the very next day, another bomb threat. Spain on March 13th, plastic bomb threat. Tainan City, Taiwan on March 20th, another bomb threat. And this is just a few examples I have on this list here. So it would seem that these threats, it's not just concentrated inside the U.S. right now. It's gone global.
That's right. These attempts to interfere with the performance have gone on around the world, pretty much wherever we perform. We do about 200 cities every tour, and we go to 5 continents, and these things follow us. To be completely clear, there's never been an actual threat in the theater. They're just trying to scare people. We always work very closely with law enforcement and police and the theater security. They bring in the canines, they investigate everything. And at the Kennedy Center, for example, last month when we were performing, we were setting up, getting ready to perform, the entire complex was evacuated. 6 buildings and multiple performing arts companies, and we waited outside in the cold in freezing weather for 3 hours to get that resolved. And they said, nope, there's nothing here. This is just a prank. So we do take it very, very seriously. But it is happening, as you mentioned, all over the world. I've counted 32 cases over the last 2.5 months that we've been performing this year. All over the world, we got them in Birmingham, Alabama, and Huntsville, Alabama, and St. Louis, and Des Moines. That's just the last week or so. And they're pretty much the same. They often come from the same email address, the same text. And there's just an attempt to try to scare Americans and scare our audience members wherever we go, like you mentioned, Taiwan, Europe, from seeing the performance and discovering. And you have to ask yourself, why is the CCP so afraid that they're going to these lengths to try to keep people from finding out what traditional Chinese culture and what another China could be like?
Now, despite all of these threats, Shenyun did just have its opening night at Lincoln Center 2 nights ago, and the company performs at top venues all across the world. How have audience members been reacting this year?
Oh, the audience has been great. We feel like the audience is really on our side. A lot of them will go on camera afterwards, and you can see them online, the reviews that they give. These are real people. You can see their emotion when they come out of the performance. The words that they use are things like uplifting, hope, inspiring. They talk about discovering new ideas for their careers and their own spiritual faith. And that's the reaction the audience members get. Our performers, you asked me about that earlier, they're not deterred. I was talking to one of our principal dancers the other day. She said, none of this is going to stop us. They're very focused on their message and their mission and their art. And what they enjoy the most is seeing the curtain come up and performing for the audience and connecting with the audience. And they're not going to be deterred by this.
So, Li-Shai, for our viewers watching us right now, what can they do to learn more about this? And if there's anyone who wants to help Shenyun's cause, what can they do?
Well, the easiest way is to go see the performance, learn more about who we are and what we're doing. And there's a lot of information there in the program books that people receive. Shenyun.com. That's SHENYUN.com. I also have a podcast on YouTube or on podcast called Shenyun Voices, where you can hear directly from the performers about their own experiences and what they do and some of the misconceptions and biases that they face. And Shenyun.org is where you can learn more about the artists and our mission and what we do and why we do it. And a lot of videos up there as well.
As Americans, it's important to protect everyone's freedom and right to speech and religion. Li-Shai Lemish, Master of Ceremonies with Shenyun Performing Arts, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for your time.
And NTD is a media sponsor of Shenyun. Coming up, the Department of Government Efficiency's website says it has helped save $130 billion so far. Elon Musk and the DOGE team shed light on the work they are doing to slash the federal budget. Melina Weiskup reports. And President Trump has levied 25% tariffs on most imports of foreign-made autos. How much could that cause car prices to rise? Kevin Hogan breaks down the numbers after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump signed an executive order changing union rights for many federal workers. The Office of Personnel Management issued a memo instructing agencies to end collective bargaining agreements and cease engaging with unions. The administration says the move will help agencies with national security missions operate more efficiently. However, labor unions argue it limits workers' rights and plan to challenge the order in court. The directive applies to agencies including Homeland Security, Defense, Veterans Affairs, and the Environmental Protection Agency. It also calls for a return to in-person work and changes to performance review policies. The DOGE team says they are bringing a business-minded approach to the federal government. So far, the group says it saved over $100 billion in tax dollars, with the ultimate goal of slashing the federal deficit in half. NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
DOGE is working towards a lofty goal to cut the federal government's budget from $7 trillion to $6 trillion. Musk says his team has found casual waste in the billions.
The government is not efficient, and there's a lot of waste and fraud. So we feel confident that a 15% reduction can be done without affecting any of the critical government services. 10-question survey that you could do with SurveyMonkey, cost you about $10,000, the government was being charged almost $1 billion for that.
For just the survey?
$1 billion for a simple online survey, do you like the national park?
In an effort to make the behind-the-scenes work more transparent, Elon Musk and his DOGE team joined Fox's Bret Baier. When asked about sensitive issues like whether Social Security and Medicaid are on the chopping block, he said their team will make the programs stronger by rooting out fraud.
Legitimate people, as a result of the work of DOGE, will receive more Social Security, not less. I want to emphasize that. As a result of the work of DOGE, legitimate recipients of Social Security will receive more money, not less money.
You can call Social Security. We learned 40% of the phone calls that they get are from fraudsters.
If we don't do it, America's going to go insolvent. We're going to go bankrupt. And nobody's going to get anything.
They say a main issue causing inefficiencies in the government are outdated computer systems that cost around $100 billion to maintain. So far, the group has cut consulting contracts, unused federal buildings, duplicate programs, and DEI initiatives. According to DOGE's website, the group has saved every taxpayer $800 so far, with the ultimate goal of slashing the federal deficit in half and passing a financial audit. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Congressional Republicans have set a timeline to pass a reconciliation bill with President Trump's priorities. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
What is going to happen in reconciliation is we're going to have to figure out how to extend the tax policy. And remember, this is extending existing tax policy. There's some other things the president wants to do in the context of that, all of which we think will be additive to the economy.
Republican lawmakers have set May 1st as the deadline to pass a reconciliation bill that increases the debt ceiling, that extends the 2017 Trump tax cuts, and adds supplemental funding for border security and the military. Democrats have found a renewed sense of unity in their opposition to the Republicans' plans.
It is hard to believe that the Trump administration wants to cut Social Security. Why would they do this? They're in a frenzy to give tax breaks, tax cuts to the wealthiest, the very wealthiest billionaires in America. They're just frenetic about it.
House Republicans are determined to enact the largest Medicaid cut in American history so they can give Elon Musk and their billionaire MAGA donors a massive tax cut is outrageous.
House Republicans plan on cutting $1.5 trillion of government spending to offset extending the tax cuts. Senate Republicans, on the other hand, await a decision from the Senate parliamentarian on the current policy baseline in an attempt to skip having to find any offsets to extending the Trump tax cuts altogether.
Well, Social Security is not eligible for consideration under reconciliation, so that doesn't get touched. And the president has made certain statements with respect to Medicare and Medicaid. Where can we find savings that are associated with waste, fraud, and abuse in some of these government programs, notwithstanding what the program is?
House Republicans have 59 days to find $1.5 trillion of government spending cuts, and House Republican leadership is expecting to send budget instructions to committee chairs by April 7th.
Like when you're playing billiards and you're playing pool, right? You go on the table and the balls are racked, right? And you hit it as hard as you can. This is many people's strategy in the game. You hit it as hard as you can to break up the balls on the table and send them spread. Then you play the strategy of sinking them in the holes, right? That's what we're doing right now. It is a shakeup.
It is important to note that Florida will have 2 special elections next week to fill the seats left empty by former Congressman Matt Gaetz and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
President Trump's tariff policy may drive up prices on your next car. Trump says it's a necessary step that will protect the American auto industry and improve national security. Our data reporter Kevin Hogan breaks down the numbers.
That's 25% tariffs that President Trump is imposing on imported vehicles. It's not all of them, because they're still working out the details, and it doesn't apply so much to those made with American parts. However, that is a lot of tariff action going on, and that could affect your bottom line. Let's look at the data. So, for example, according to CNBC, different experts and analysts have different takes on how much this is going to cause import auto prices to rise. So, for example, Bernstein, Guggenheim, Goldman, they put it at about $5,000 to $6,000 just added right on top of that sticker price. However, for Goldman, for locally made cars, those could go up to $8,000 more expensive because think about it. They're made with parts. Some of those parts are foreign parts. Bank of America is putting that additional cost at just under $5,000, right? But there's a range to this. So that max comes all the way out, look at this, to $15,000 that could be added for some of those imports, right? Now, there's more to this because, again, you have other countries that are looking on that might not be too happy because they export a lot of autos to the United States. So, for example, Canadian Prime Minister, he says that the United States is no longer a reliable trade partner. So that's very serious. These two countries are very nestled in together in terms of trade. And not only that, but the southern neighbor of the United States, Mexico, their economy minister says that since they're moving to a system with such high tariffs, then they have to look for a preferential treatment for Mexico. So they're trying to work all this out as it's unfolding. And when you look at the data for the countries, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, that import cars into the United States, that value could be up to $40 billion or more. For example, for Mexico, Japan, South Korea, those are the top 3 countries that would be affected the most by this. Canada is a pretty close fourth. Again, remember, Mexico and Canada, they're part of the USMCA, so there's still more details that need to be worked out. Maybe not all of these tariffs would apply. But what about the tariffs, the actual auto production, in terms of how much that is made up of a share of their GDP? Well, Mexico, that's over 4% of their GDP comes from importing cars to the United States. So that's a huge share. Japan, South Korea, it's 1-2%, not quite as much. But look at this, Slovakia, that comes out to over 4% for their GDP. So that's a massive amount of their whole economy that's made up just from importing cars to the United States. They call Slovakia the Detroit of Europe. It makes more cars per capita than any other country in the world. Think Land Rover, think Volkswagen. They both have auto manufacturing plants in Slovakia's capital. So that's a very serious move that Trump's making, and it's really impacting a lot of these countries. So you got to look out. There could be reciprocal tariffs on the way. Back to you.
Coming up, Los Angeles County is facing scrutiny over faulty DNA test kits used for months in criminal investigations. This issue could impact hundreds of cases. Christina Corona reports. And March Madness continues tonight with 4 games on the schedule, including a 3rd match between Kentucky and Tennessee. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Los Angeles County is facing some serious questions after learning that faulty DNA test kits were used in criminal cases for at least 8 months. NTD's Christina Corona has more on this story.
Nearly 4,000 DNA samples must be retested after the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department discovered that they had been using faulty DNA test kits in criminal investigations from July 2024 to February 2025. In a news release issued Wednesday, the department said the manufacturer sent a notice last year indicating that some kits were, quote, prone to intermittently poor performance with potential to cause incomplete results. The manufacturer recommended stopping use of the kits, but the letter, which was sent on August 28, 2024, went to a former employee, leading to no one at the department knowing about the issue. The kits continued to be used for 8 months until a current employee at the Scientific Services Bureau discovered the letter on Monday. The Sheriff's Department will retest about 4,000 samples, though some may not be retestable due to limited sample size. Sheriff Robert Luna issues a statement saying, "We take the integrity of our investigations and forensic testing seriously." He goes on to say, "We are committed to addressing this, ensuring transparency, and taking corrective action to protect ongoing and future cases." But other agencies, including the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, were also affected. After learning of the issue, the DA's office began working with the Sheriff's Department to assess the situation and keep everyone who may be impacted notified. The DNA kit manufacturer was not identified in the release, and the Sheriff's Department believes that the faulty tests did not result in false identifications. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the NCAA tournament as tonight the Sweet 16 continues with 4 more games. Now, what are you most looking forward to seeing?
You know, I think Michigan State versus Ole Miss. Now, Tom Izzo's team, they've not been to the Final Four in 6 years. I realize tonight's game is just a Sweet 16, so we're not quite at that stage yet. But that's the longest drought under Tom Izzo there. He's led the team to 8 Final Fours and a national title. In fact, he's the only coach left who's won a national title. Now, that game is the first game tonight, starting just after the top of the hour. Now, the second game, Tennessee versus Kentucky, a couple of SEC foes. This will be their 3rd matchup this season. Kentucky won the first 2, but Tennessee somehow is actually 5-point favorites tonight, so go figure on that one. Then you got the 2 later games, Michigan versus Auburn. Auburn, of course, they were #1 for most of the season, and they lost 3 of the last 4. I wasn't quite sure what to expect with them. They might have their hands full tonight. Michigan's got a very tall lineup, got a couple of 7-footers in there. In the final game, you've got Houston versus Purdue. Now, Houston may be the #1 seed, but this is a essentially a road game for them. This game is going to be in Indianapolis. It's like 60 miles from Purdue's campus. This one should be a very close one. I don't see any blowouts anyway of these 4 games like we had last night, though.
Oh, speaking of last night, Alabama put on a record-setting performance to beat BYU, and their reward is to play number 1 at Duke. How do they line up against Duke?
You know, I'm very curious actually to find out. Alabama, they pushed the pace. They were unbelievable shooting last night. I mean, 25 three-pointers. That was absolutely ridiculous. That was an incredible performance. Duke, meanwhile, they like to push the pace too. I mean, they average 83 points a game. That's not too far behind Bama, who leads the NCAA. But I think Duke's going to be much more focused on defense. Now, they got Malik Brown last night, who's like a very good defensive player. He's like 6'9". He can guard all five positions. I think he'll be very key for them because they're going to have to be out on the perimeter guarding, especially like Malik Sears, who hit 10 of those threes. In the other Elite Eight matchup, we've got Texas Tech versus Florida. Now, Florida, I know I picked them to win the national title, but Texas Tech, they had that incredible comeback last night, down 13 with 5 minutes left. Somehow got it to overtime where they won there. Sometimes a win like that can propel you, so I think Florida could be on upset alert later on tonight.
Also yesterday, it was baseball's opening day for a number of teams. What were some of the highlights?
You know, I think Juan Soto's debut with the Mets, I think everyone was looking forward to that. That $765 million contract, biggest in American sports history. So he comes out, he goes 1 for 3 with a walk, but unfortunately, he has a chance to win the game at the end. He ends up striking out to end the game. So a lot of expectations for sure with that huge contract. He's still got 161 more games to go this year. So, but I'm sure Mets fans are hoping, you know, next time that he comes up in a situation like that, he can deliver. Now, meanwhile, the Dodgers, Shohei Ohtani already his 2nd home run of the season. Dodgers are already 3-0 right now. They're the overwhelming favorites to win the World Series again. I mean, it feels like you might as well already start counting down their magic number, even though they're 7 months away from the playoffs there. And then this afternoon, the Rays beat the Rockies. Those two were the only teams that had not played yet. They played actually at the Rays' new stadium, which is actually the Yankees' spring training site, Steinbrenner Field. It was interesting because they had to change out all the Yankees logos there to the Rays logos just for this summer. Of course, the Rays Stadium was hurt by the Hurricane Milton last fall. So it'd be very interesting, I think, also when the Yankees eventually visit this summer and see all the changes going on at their spring training site. But anyway, 8 more baseball games tonight as well.
Perhaps an identity crisis there. All Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
So thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.